Good morning. This is Jody Sidlauskas, RIT Associate Archivist. Today is October 15th, 2016, and I am conducting oral histories with graduates from RIT's class of 1966. These folks have come to RIT today for Brick City Weekend, and they are sharing their stories from their time at RIT as students. And this morning I have with me Gordon Reed. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you, Jody.
And we're going to begin. So can you tell us what years you attended RIT?
Yes, I started in fall of 1962 and went through 66. And because of the co-op, we actually, we graduated in I guess June at that point, but we went through with our co-op and finished school, and I think it was the end of August of 66 also.
And you were on the downtown campus?
Yes, totally on the downtown campus for the full time. And
yeah, you were a full-time student?
yeah, I was a full-time day student, and my major, it was the College of Business, and it was the School of Retailing, and all my electives were in interior design, which was one of the divisions that you could study, and ended up with a Bachelor of Science in business.
Business.
Yes.
And do you remember why you chose RIT?
Yes, I went to high school in Manchester, New York at Red Jacket, and we were very fortunate to have a guidance counselor, and he directed me to what I wanted to do, and I wanted to have something in interior design, and I found out where the schools were, and the one in New York City I was a little intimidated by, being a youngster at that point. So RIT was certainly close by, about 30 miles, and so I was very excited to come to college. Had no preparation for it from any relatives, anybody. So I was the pioneer.
And do you remember where your classes were held? Some of the buildings, maybe?
Yeah, pretty much they were on West Main Street. There was a older building that all of our classes fell into. And so we were pretty much there, and I have a strange memory that I can't find anybody that can confirm, and I think it's kind of laughable, so it's either me or them, is that for part of either the third or fourth year, the RIT rented a floor in an adjacent building on West Main, right, I think in the same block, and for a semester or two, we actually went to that building, and all I can remember was that it was a former department store, long, long gone, but it was an elegant old granite building with giant windows, and but again, I'm the only one that seems to remember that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. How about any of your favorite professors?
Well, of course, my favorite one was the head of the design department, and that was Mary Miller. And Mary Miller was an artiste. Now, you have to understand, I came from a small town on a farm, and which I'm very proud of. And luckily, I knew I wanted a lot more. I didn't want to be a farmer. So coming to RIT was very exciting for me, and design. But when I met Mary, she was kind of a free spirit. And again, you have to realize, as a young person at that point, you weren't exposed to any part of the world. So this was the biggest thing for me of coming to RIT, was to welcome to the real world, the grown-up world. and which was probably the most important thing, other than one we'll get into in a couple of minutes. But so Mary Miller was wonderful. I couldn't figure her out though, because she had a great fun in life, very, very knowledgeable on the history of design. Of course, in those days, everything was what we now call almost mid-century from a design standpoint, basically architect-driven. The Eames chairs and Bertoyas and all of that I never knew existed until RIT. But she lived in one of the old houses across from Kate Gleason. She had the attic level, and it was all a series of strange ceiling heights and angles and everything, and she had this wonderful apartment. Well, I loved it. And I mean, I still remember that today, that it was an artist's apartment. It wasn't by the rules or anything. And then there was one time that I think she took me to my very first auction. There was a sale on Mount Hope Avenue of that beautiful Victorian house that's used to be it was the owner of the nursery company that started in like the 1840s in Rochester, and then it was the president of U of R's home, and which I may still own it. But anyhow, they were clearing out this house, and so she invited me to go with her and another friend of mine, and it was an auction, and she bought an old wind-up Victrola, and I think that was my beginning of loving antiques and auctions and collecting and the fun of all this stuff that's made for your home over the years. So she was pretty wonderful. The other one, and I can't remember her name, but I think she was probably my fourth year, and it was like either civilization course, and she sat me down one day after class, and I couldn't tell you today whether I asked the question or whatever, but I remember whatever the question was, the answer was, Gordon, if you learn nothing more in your 4 years at RIT other than how to listen and how to think, you will have achieved the greatest part of your education. And probably the question, probably what we were talking about was, how do you remember all this stuff, and am I going to use it, and all this knowledge and everything. And of course nowadays I understand all the benefit of that, but you know, it was a phase, and that was a wonderful phase. I had excellent professors. The craziest professor beyond dear Mary Miller was, and I'm sure everybody will talk about him, is Burkholder. And he also, all I can remember, he invited some of us up to his apartment, and he was a collector of frogs. Well, I don't find frogs very charming. His whole apartment was frogs, okay? Again, he was in the attic of an old house, so again, it was an artist's home. It was very wonderful. But I will tell you that in one class, and this had to have been the freshman year, he brought us in, and part of the class was he spoke very gently 3 obscene words, not what we would call obscene today, but like the word that begins with S and ends in T, and like 3 of those, and you know, and most of the class recoiled on hearing those from a professor, and he says, you know, I want you to learn that you're going into an adult world, and that is part of it. And you think he really wasn't doing it for that little part, he was doing it to let us know that there would be things that we would discover here we'd like, we wouldn't like, and he wanted to put an impression in our mind that we were on the road to becoming an adult in a real world. And I was always grateful, as much as I laugh about it, but I was grateful for that. It just stuck in my head somewhere.
Yeah, interesting lesson there.
Yeah. Now, I do not know if senior management knew that he used those words, but I'm sure they knew of him, certainly, because I don't think he ever changed, so that was quite wonderful.
And what did he teach?
Yeah. I don't know. Short of going into the yearbook, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I have one problem that I wish were different. I can remember more about the social part of my 4 years than I actually can sitting in class with professors, except for one or two. Because other people will talk about, well, Professor X or Professor Y, and I'll go, God, I need a book. I can't even picture them. And
Yeah.
but it all goes together with wonderful memories. So.
Yes. Where did you live while you were going to school?
Well, of course, the first year we chose to live in, obviously on campus rather than at home, which was 30 miles away. And it was Nathaniel Rochester Hall, the old Rochester Hotel on Main Street. And again, all of a sudden, that was the fall of '62, and all of a sudden we've got this room with not only 4 guys, but a 5th guy, because they had more people around, than they had space for. And sadly, that guy on the roll-up cot left in about a month, so we didn't have to worry. So we're back to the 2 bunk beds. So that, and then second year, I really wanted my own space. So I moved in with another person from the design area business school, and we had a place over in the 3rd Ward, again an apartment, one of the old houses. In fact, it was right about 2 doors down from one of the major fraternity houses there. But the funny thing about that was there were 3 of us in this like 2-bedroom. It used to be the living room, dining room, and upstairs was non-student. It was obviously an old man, and he kept thumping on the floor because we were students and making appropriate noise. And he came to the door and threatened to get his shotgun and shoot through the floor if we didn't quiet down. Well, needless to say, we took that to the landlord immediately, and he was gone the next day. But again, the experience of life, welcome to the real world. Mm-hmm. And then went over, just off of Monroe Avenue to again another old house, and then finally moved back onto campus in a private home, that had student apartments in it. So then we were back on campus, which was very good. So we ended up staying there for the last 2 years, I think it was.
Did you have a car, or would you use public transportation?
Yeah, I had a car, always there, but the campus obviously was much smaller than it is today, so walking to campus and everything was very good. But
Any remembrance of what your housing might have cost you?
no, but I still have, which I may send to the archives department at RIT, I still have the paperwork, and there's one where it shows that my parents, I'm sure at that point, made a payment for a semester, and it was like, get ready for this, it was something like $600. It was so low, you can't even believe that it ever happened that way. But
yes.
Time changes.
Yes. And you did a co-op, I think you mentioned. Can you tell us where?
Yes. My co-op was really centered on McCurdy's department store, which was on East Main Street, opposite Sibley's, and family owned. And I also worked there when I was going to classes, to have some income going there. But there are 2 hysterical stories. I hope you enjoy them too. Is one, I was like the the quote floor walker of the budget store. Okay, used to be called, that was a fancy name for the basement, but anyhow. And so they would bring the welfare people in that needed clothing, and they would have an allowance that they had been given to buy clothes. And so, and there was also a woman from the office upstairs that would come with that welfare recipient and help them select the proper clothes and everything. Well, sadly, these people hadn't bought a lot of clothes, hadn't been able to buy the clothes that they certainly deserved and so forth. But I think there's some gentle humor in this, is that for a young student, male student, this woman comes in and she needed a foundation garment. And of course you tried it on over your blouse. And so the woman from McCurdy said, well, how does that fit? And the woman said, fine. And she turned around to the woman and to me, and she did not have, she had it lower than what it was supposed to envelop. Well, it was just about all we could do is not to crack up. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but just, and we continued to help her, and she was very happy and very grateful for that. But again, the other thing was when I got locked into the store at night, I was again responsible for gathering all the money bags from the registers and all of that, and then I took it upstairs or whatever, and all of a sudden I did that. I thought in a normal sense of time, and all of a sudden I go to walk out the door, of course nobody around me, which was fine, and they're all locked. This is like 9:20, 9:15, 9:20 at night, p.m. So technology only existed that you had a phone in those days or you screamed. And so I'm trying to dial the operator. There's no operator on duty at that hour. And I think, well, there must be some security. I couldn't find the phone book or whatever. So I finally dialed out to the police and I said, I'm locked, I'm unemployed, I'm locked in, I need your help to get out. So about 20 minutes later, by the exit door, cop drives by, policeman, excuse me, and looks in the window and keeps driving on. Well, that didn't make me feel any better. So we called the cops again, myself only, and they finally came and opened up the door. It was like 10:30 and I was scared to death.
Oh my gosh. That's a great story.
Oh, and the other thing I must say about McCurdy's, it was hysterical because when they assigned me my area, this was in one of them, probably at the beginning, they saw that I was from interior design, so the department they put me into was not furniture, it was in, again, the basement store, the budget store, folding towels in the bath department. I guess they thought that was a good use of design talent.
Oh.
I can still remember the patterns on the towels.
You probably are a good folder today.
I'm very neat, very neat.
Oh. So what do you recall about the new campus being started? Either construction or how the students felt about it, coming to Henrietta?
All I know is that it was, all I remember is that it was announced and, very, very exciting. I don't remember the people in my circle that we had any knowledge relationship other than what may have been put in the newsletter or the local thing there, but there was no taking us down there. Of course, I guess in those days it was an empty field basically, you know, because they hadn't started building much. So it really didn't mean a thing other than we knew we were going to be the last class that would spend the full 4 years on the campus downtown, and the next year, you know, I guess the last year they'd be on the new campus or whatever, and you know, they would take 4 years to transition.
That's
That's
correct.
my memory.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say that originally the opening was planned for fall of '67. So you would have been the last class, but
Yeah.
because of construction delays, they never moved till the fall of '68. So there was one more class left at the downtown campus. Okay, that's interesting. What extracurricular activities were you involved in? Anything?
None. I was a shy little country boy, and so I was kind of in a survival mode. The more I protected myself, the better I felt about it. And it was a transition that I went through at that point. It would be different as I got older, but at that point, I don't know why. I tried the ski club, one meeting, never having been on a ski in my life, maybe ice skates, and all of them were what I'd call semi-professional skiers already, and I thought, this is not going to go anywhere. So I just, you know, didn't pursue it any further than that. So.
So no, you didn't belong to any fraternity.
No, nothing there.
Well, what were some of your fondest recollections of your RIT days then?
Well, again, a lot of them, unless I sit down with somebody from the same year and we start to talk, then I can remember a few more things, but again, it's pretty much outside. The one thing that I remember that was important, one of the few things that I can remember, luckily, is that in one of our classes in retailing, and it wasn't the design, it was just the regular full retailing group of students, so design and the business students. We had a class on how to do displays. And in fact, there is a photograph of that room on the archive wall in the archive department.
Oh.
And it was a room, and there was like a little stage up front that was like a display window in department stores, which are rapidly disappearing in the United States, as we all know. But it brought back so many memories, and so again, another friend of mine, at that point had started collecting antique chairs, the bentwood style of chairs that most people refer to as cafe chairs. And he had 2 or 3 and I had 2 or 3, and we did a wonderful display, some hanging, some of them on the floor and all of that. And first time in the world I'd ever had to do something display. What was display? I don't know. And that was good. And I think that's why I still remain very good friends with that person that I worked on that with. So that was fun. The other things that I remember pretty much outside the class, of course, remember the riots. They were very, very frightening because we lived in the 3rd Ward, so we were about a block away from Clarissa Street, which the name has disappeared, but the street's still there, I think. And that was frightening because it was the first time that I recognized the frustration of the African American community. Not that I could do anything about it, but just as a learning process, and it was very frightening. I remember having a car and my parents living 30 miles away, we got into the car and just drove out of the city, you know, to be safe. I guess you could drive out. The RIT said you could drive out of the city, but nobody should come in. or stay where you are, just for your own protection. So we went down to my parents' house and stayed there for about 3 or 4 days, and then came back into the city.
Do you remember, was this during the school year or was it in the summer?
It was, well, I must admit, I can't remember, because see, it might have been summer. It was, well, because we're in co-op, so I'm not sure which year. I think that was 2015. I mean,
1964?
2015 was the anniversary. Was that, no, it could have been the 50th, 25th, anyhow. But school was in session. I remember that
Okay.
because of the campus, I mean, of the notices that we got and so forth. And so that was frightening, and hopefully everybody learned something from it.
Do you remember having any trouble down there with African Americans or?
No, the only thing that I do remember, and again, I say this from a learning experience of a young person in those days, I remember all of a sudden being back in class and not knowing quite how to look at African Americans. And I hope prior to the riots I wasn't ignoring them, because in my grade school and high school, junior school and all that, we were not exposed. We did not have African American families in our tiny little town. So all of a sudden they have a presence. And I mean it in the sense of welcome to the bigger world, okay? And so they were excuse me, I don't mean it that way. There were definitely African Americans in some of our classes. But it's, I felt frightened because I didn't want to look at the wrong way. And today I'm almost embarrassed by it. But I think, again, it was part of our culture at that point that happened at RIT with somebody from the country, and again, learning about life and so forth.
Yeah.
What else did I want to mention here? Of course, I love the design classes. I mentioned Mary Miller earlier, and she would give us, probably in the second and third year, she'd give us projects. And I remember there was a health clinic on north side of town, whether it was St. Paul or State Street or whatever goes north there. And we had to design, we were given the wall, it was a real building, and there was a lobby to it where they would walk in. And so our project was to, choose the wall colors and layout of the furniture for seating and all that kind of thing. And I'm greatly, now that I'm, at this age, you realize how much you learn with those simple projects and so forth. And so those classes, and if I go on and on, I can remember certain little things. But the other thing that I thought was cute about RIT was I was never ever interested in sports. My father wasn't. I didn't inherit any love of it. I was not athletic in school. And when I would come home, I'd either do homework or help my dad. And so we didn't go in town and play baseball or basketball or whatever. But what I think is so delightful about RIT remembering is the hockey. All of a sudden we'd go to the hockey games and I loved it. I remember sitting in that tiny little old gym that's still there and rooting for the team. And I got so interested in hockey that my parents took a trip to Lake Placid in the wintertime, which was interesting. Because my dad had just bought a Chevy convertible, and if you can imagine a white convertible in the snow and the cold air, the heater didn't heat the top of the car. And anyhow, I went to Lake Placid, and we had to go to the hockey game up there. It was really just got me loving it. I haven't participated in, because we're not being in the Rochester area until back in the Rochester area for about 10 years ago. But I loved it. I was fascinated by the hockey. And I think because it was so understandable. I mean, there's players with a stick and there's a puck. And that's kind of it. Where baseball, basketball just frustrates me because there's so many rules. I don't know what they're doing, and I'm sure it's because I didn't want to know what they were doing, because I couldn't play it. Anyhow, but hockey is a wonderful memory from my RIT days. I can't really think of anything that I disliked about RIT. I was so happy to be learning. I was so happy to be out of home. And for a little shy, naive person, something in my mind wanted more. And RIT gave me that. My dad was hoping that I stayed on the farm, which I did not do. And Mom encouraged me, my mother encouraged me to go to college. Just whatever I wanted to do, she was fine with, but she was the one that had a very good education. She almost went to college, but way back in the Depression, she couldn't afford it. But she kind of gave me that drive, and I thought, I've got to really make this work. Another memory is I remember coming into Nathaniel Rochester, the first dorm, the first year, and again, as I said earlier, we had 4 additional roommates, and of course you had 4 additional personalities that were frightening, and I remember it wasn't more than the first weekend or the second week, I wanted to drive home and cry on Mom and Dad's shoulder. I really did. I was frightened, and I didn't do it. I don't know how I was so smart. I wish I were that smart today, but I just stayed there for either a month or 2 before I went back home so that I could conquer that. And I did. And I still had to learn a lot, but I wasn't retreating back into this, I wasn't dismissing college as a frightening experience. So I was very happy that I liked RIT that much. So I really, it's very different today, very, very exciting, but I'm very grateful for the experience of being there. I thought it might be, I did want to mention that I still remember Catherine Hartfelter, who was one of the women in the business college. I adored her, and she was my placement director, and Edwina B. Hogadone, delightful woman, difficult name, but kind of fun, Old English, and I remember Mark Ellison, but I remember him being there, and I'm sure I saw him more than once. But the only thing I remember, because of my love of design and historic houses, I remember seeking out where he lived. And he lived on East Avenue, right outside of Pittsburgh. And it was a former big white mansion with big white portico and pillars back behind a lot of trees. And at some point, my dad had an antique 36 Packard touring car, gray. And so we were out driving around. I said, well, let's see where the house is, or whether I knew where it was. So I convinced my dad to drive up the front driveway and park the car, and I took a photograph of it, which I'd love to bring to the archives. I may be able to find that. In fact, I think I know where it is right now. I just thought of that.
Yes.
And so here's this 36 Packard sitting in front of this white pillared mansion, And I don't think he was home. He did not come out to see the car. He probably would have if he was home. So that was a wonderful memory on itself. And
That's great. Oh, that's a great story. And I know the house you're speaking of, we have photos of it in the archives, and
is it
it
still
was
there?
it was owned by RIT. Is it still there?
Honestly, I have tried to find it more than once,
Yeah.
and I can't.
I don't think it is.
I know where it was
Mhm.
within 3 or 4 blocks, and I just can't seem to see back in there.
I want to say it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I haven't looked
Yeah.
recently, but
I was just curious about
I feel like it was demolished and something else was put in there.
more houses.
I'll have to
probably.
check into
Yeah.
that, yes. That was a nice house.
Mm.
Okay, so after RIT, did you go to graduate school or straight to work?
No, I went straight to work, and with the help of Catherine Hartfelder, placement director, she had me she knew me, and I could sense that. She says, Gordon, I know the kind of family-owned business that you would be best suited for. And I wanted to go into interior design, so my love of home furnishings and so forth, and antiques and houses and antique cars, anyhow. And so she had me interview, and these stores are long gone. Higbee's in Cleveland, Woodward and Lothrop in Washington, D.C., and Strawbridge and Clothier in Philadelphia, all family owned. Of course, all of them are gone now. They're all have been bought up by Macy's and Federated and so forth. So the world that I loved has changed completely. So as everybody knows, in cities, department stores certainly aren't the focus that they were in the 60s and 70s and so forth. But I took the job at Strawbridge and Clothier in Philadelphia because that seemed to be the best fit. And I was there for 15 years, and I started in the buying department as an assistant buyer, which was again fabulous because I learned what buying was. And then they were, again, in those years, they were creating a brand new department, a new position within almost every major department store. And it was called the Fashion Director of Home Furnishings.
Mm-hmm.
So you worked for the store, and you worked with the buying organization, going out into the markets and selecting and guiding the product. You were the aesthetic arm to that, and then what was bought, and again, display was everything in those days. That was your image. And then that was communicated to the individual display departments at each store. So that was a fabulous one because that took me to the markets in all over the United States, pretty much, East and West Coast. And I got to go to Europe.
Mm.
And these were the days, my first trip was 1972, and that was when Scandinavian furniture was all the rage, the teak, the light wood finishes. And so we had a Scandinavian shop, and we bought furniture direct, and I got to go to the Copenhagen Furniture Fair. And from 1972 to about 1986, I was very fortunate to go to Europe at least once a year, if not twice. We had import meetings where all the selected European manufacturers would show their product, and we would then buy it directly, which was always a savings from buying it through a New York, quote, New York U.S. importer. Mm. And those were the days that you could make money. The value of the dollar was such that it was to your benefit to develop product and import. So that was a tremendous learning experience, and that continued through my second job. In 1980, I left for Ohio, both Columbus and Cincinnati, for Lazarus Department Stores, which was Federated. And again, all these disappeared in name. And did the same thing, but I had the top position. I was the. In Strawbridge's, I was the assistant, but I was given more and more authority. So I learned. And I centered a great deal on furniture. Furniture was kind of the catalyst for everything. That's where design came from. And in those years, department stores sold a lot of furniture. Of course, in recent years, they're not interested in that, and so forth. But, and then, so I still continued to go to Europe and the Orient once or twice. So I look back now and what a fortunate I was, because I loved being in a foreign country, because I was in somebody else's culture. I always treated them as I was their guest, and I wasn't trying to compare it to the United States. I wanted to explore, I wanted to learn, I wanted to gather information, I wanted to see their culture. We always had a person locally that spoke the language, so obviously it was very easy to enjoy it and travel for business and a little bit of pleasure in between. And then there was a lot of buyouts. And 1989, I went to North Carolina. I was tired of retailing, so I wanted to get in the furniture industry. Loved furniture. So wrote resumes and all that, and I was hired by a very fine high-end furniture manufacturer called Hickory Chair, still around, still doing wonderful. And I was in charge of their upholstered furniture as opposed to dining room or bedroom. And that was a learning experience, and that lasted for about 5 years, and then we seemed to have a little bit of a recession, and last man in is first man out. But while I was there, I had a double-digit growth, so I figured I must be doing something, so then I took that love of furniture to a second high-end company, and then that company was bought out, laughingly. So those were the years in department stores and in the furniture industry. And then finally, my last job, while I was still in North Carolina, I became a sales rep for upholstered furniture fabric. So the company was based in New York City, but I lived in North Carolina, and I would take their line of decorative fabrics around to all the different factories that made upholstery, and then they would buy upholstery from my company and then put it on their upholstery for each of the different markets. So I learned all about fabrics again, which RIT started it with Mary Miller's little book, where we had all these little squares like postage stamps, and the fabric, the details of the fabric, and the little one-by-one cutouts of what a Ninon fabric was, or a brocade, or a Bargello stitch, and I still have that workbook.
You do?
With all the little pastings in it.
Do you know we have some older ones like
Do
that
you?
with the little samples and written what it
I'm
is?
going to donate
That would be
those
wonderful.
things,
Oh
and
my gosh.
Because they have no value to anybody but me and you.
An RIT, sure.
Yeah, so I'm very, very happy. I learned that yesterday, working with you.
Thank you.
So anyhow, so that was about 4 years, give or take. And then finally, for family reasons, I came back to upstate New York. My family is still here. Take care of my parents while they were with us. And so I'm happy to be back in the Rochester area. Maybe I can go to a hockey game again.
Oh my goodness, this is the place. This is Hockey Central.
Yes.
That
yes.
big new arena.
I even bought a T-shirt yesterday.
Oh, did you? RIT Hockey? Wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful memories.
Very good. Well, we're going to wrap up, I think, and I want to thank you once again for being here, for coming back, for agreeing to share your RIT story with us, and I'm certain that generations to come will just enjoy these stories so much.
Well, I hope so, and I encourage, I wasn't going to volunteer to do this, and you know, you have to do sometimes what you don't think of first, and it allows you to remember things that bring such enjoyment to you about the RIT years. And so Jody, I thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks.